They removed me from my own company on a Tuesday morning. I remember because it was raining and I had brought an umbrella for the first time in years. I sat in the conference room I had built. Literally, I had laid the carpet samples out on this very floor 31 years ago, and my son read from a prepared statement without looking up once. "The board has voted to transition leadership," he said, "effective immediately." My daughter-in-law, Sandra, sat beside him. She had her hands folded on the table, like she was waiting for communion. She had been waiting for this for a long time. I didn't say a word. My name is Gerald. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building Hartwell Structural Consulting from a two-man operation out of my garage into a firm with 47 employees and contracts with 3 state transportation departments. I did this quietly, carefully, the way my father taught me to do everything: measure twice, cut once, and never let anyone see you sweat. My son's name is Philip. He is 34. He is smart in the way that business school makes people smart, confident with numbers, comfortable in a room, quick to speak. He is not smart in the way that matters on a job site or in a courtroom, and he has never learned the difference. His mother and I raised him well. I believe that. What happened to him later, what Sandra did to him and what he allowed, that is a different story. I need to start earlier than that conference room. You need to understand what was there before, so you understand what was being taken. My wife, Carol, passed away 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 54 years old, and she had never been sick a day in her life before that. I am not going to spend much time on that part because I still cannot talk about it the way it deserves to be talked about. What I will say is that Carol was the one who kept the warmth in our house. I kept the structure. She kept the warmth. When she was gone, the structure remained, but the house went cold, and Philip felt that coldness more than he should have. Sandra came into Philip's life about 8 months after Carol passed. She was 31 at the time, worked in marketing, had a laugh that filled a room. I will not pretend I disliked her immediately. I didn't. She was energetic and attentive, and she made Philip smile in a way I hadn't seen since before his mother got sick. I was grateful for that. I told her so. What I noticed, slowly, the way you notice a leak in a foundation, not all at once, but by the staining on the wall over time, was the way she positioned herself. Small things at first. She started joining Philip for his Friday afternoon check-ins at the office. She began asking detailed questions about contracts at dinner. She took an interest in our HR structure that I found at the time to be merely curious. She told Philip she wanted to understand his world. I told myself that was a good quality in a partner. She and Philip married 2 years after Carol passed. I gave a toast at the wedding that I meant sincerely. I said Sandra brought light back into our family. People cried. I still have the video somewhere. What I didn't know at the wedding, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was that Sandra had already begun talking to 2 of our board members privately. She had already begun building something. The company's board had 5 members. I held 2 seats, mine and a legacy seat I carried from the original incorporation. Philip had 1 seat, which I had given him at 30 when I began transitioning leadership responsibilities. The other 2 seats were held by long-term partners, men I had known for 15 and 20 years respectively. Ray Calhoun, who had come up with me from the early days, and Don Feaster, who had joined us when we expanded into bridge inspection work. What Sandra understood, and I give her this credit, she is not a foolish woman, was that she didn't need me, she needed Ray and Don. I don't know exactly what she said to them. I know some of it now from what came out later. She told Ray that I had been showing signs of cognitive decline. She pointed to a contract I had let expire unrenewed as evidence. She didn't mention that I had let it expire intentionally because that client had developed a safety culture I no longer trusted. She told Don that I was becoming a liability, that my resistance to new technology was costing us bids. That was partially true and partially misrepresented. I was resistant to one specific software platform because I had read the failure analysis on 3 projects that used it. I had a 40-page document to that effect that no one had asked to see. She planted these seeds over about 18 months. She did it while sitting at my dinner table. She did it while asking me how I took my coffee. She did it with the patience of someone who understood that good demolition work doesn't announce itself. Philip, I believe, thought it was his idea. That is the part that took me the longest to accept. My son did not wake up one morning and decide to push his father out. He was guided there slowly, by someone who knew how to guide him, and by the time he arrived, he had convinced himself he had walked there alone. Sandra is talented at making people feel like their thoughts are their own. The Tuesday it happened, I sat through the whole reading of the transition plan. It was 11 pages. Sandra had written most of it. Her fingerprints were all over the language, the sentence structure, the way certain phrases were designed to sound legal without actually being legal. I know her writing. I had read enough of her internal memos by then. When Philip finished reading, he finally looked up. "Dad," he said, "we think this is best for the company." I picked up my umbrella from the back of the chair. I said, "All right, Philip," and I left. I want to be clear about something. The silence I kept over the next several months was not the silence of a man who didn't understand what was happening. It was not the silence of grief, although there was grief in it. It was the silence of a man who had spent 31 years in structural engineering and knew that when you find a serious flaw in a load-bearing element, you do not start shouting on the job site. You document, you photograph, you bring in your instruments. You build your case with the precision the situation demands, because the alternative, acting too soon, acting loudly, acting without complete information, brings the whole thing down on everyone, including people who don't deserve it. I had my instruments. I had been using them for a while. What Sandra did not know about me, what very few people know because I have never been someone who announces his credentials at dinner parties, is that before I founded Hartwell Structural Consulting, I spent 8 years working as a forensic engineering investigator for the federal government. My work was specifically in financial fraud related to infrastructure contracts. I investigated bid rigging, embezzlement, kickback schemes, and public works projects. I was good at it. I left because Carol and I wanted to build something of our own, and because government work at that level takes a particular toll on a marriage, and we had plans for our life together. But those 8 years don't leave you. The way of seeing things, the methodology, the understanding of how people hide money and move assets and create paper trails that are meant to mislead, that doesn't go away just because you hung your own shingle. Sandra had been moving money. She had started small, the way people always start. A consulting fee here, paid to an LLC she controlled. A vendor contract there with a company that shared an address with her sister's home in Scottsdale. The amounts were modest at first, enough to be explainable if anyone looked. Not enough to trigger the thresholds that would catch automated attention. Over 22 months, by my count, the total came to just under $400,000. She had done it carefully, but she had done it inside a company that was founded by a forensic fraud investigator, and she had done it to a man who had been watching. I had a banker friend named Walter. We had been close since college, and he had handled some of the company's early financing. Walter had nothing to do with the company anymore, hadn't for years, but he was someone I trusted completely. About 3 months before the board vote, before I had any idea the vote was coming, when I was only beginning to see the shape of what Sandra was building, I had a quiet lunch with Walter and I described what I was seeing without naming anyone or giving any specifics. Walter listened. At the end of lunch, he said, "Gerald, whoever this is, they've done it before. The structure you're describing is not amateur." He was right. After the board removed me, I had time, and I used it. I spent 4 months completing the picture. I was methodical. I was patient. I kept the documents in a fireproof safe in my study, and I kept copies off-site, and I kept digital backups with an attorney I had retained who was not connected to Hartwell in any way. By the time Sandra filed for divorce from Philip, which she did, abruptly, 11 months after the board vote, after the company had lost 2 significant state contracts under her strategic direction, I had a complete record, every transaction, every LLC, the Scottsdale address, the original vendor contracts with her signature alongside the disbursement authorizations, the pattern of escalation, the parallel I had identified between Hartwell's payment schedule and the incorporation dates of her holding companies. I want to stop here and tell you about my son because he is not the villain of this story, and I don't want you to leave thinking he is. Philip made serious mistakes. He was manipulated, yes, but he also chose not to look at things I believe he sensed were wrong. He chose comfort and confidence over the harder work of examining what was in front of him. I raised him, and I take some responsibility for that. A man who watches his father be quiet and steady his entire life sometimes learns the wrong lesson about when to speak up. When Sandra filed for divorce, Philip called me. It was 11 o'clock at night. He didn't say much at first. I listened to him breathe on the phone for a long moment. "Dad," he finally said, "I think I've made a serious mistake." "I know," I said. "I think I've made a serious mistake." "I know," I said. "Did you know before?" I was quiet for a moment. I knew some things, not everything. "Why didn't you say something?" And that is the question, isn't it? I have thought about how to answer it for a long time. What I told Philip that night is what I believe to be true, because saying it too soon would have put you on her side and taken away any chance of the truth coming out on its own. She needed enough rope, and she took it. He didn't respond to that for a while. Then he said, "She bankrupted us, didn't she?" "Not completely," I said, "but close. And I can help with that part if you'll let me." The divorce proceedings were where it all came out. Sandra's attorney was a man named Clifford Brennan out of a mid-sized firm downtown, and he came into the first hearing with considerable confidence. Sandra had positioned herself as the aggrieved party, forced out of a company by a difficult father-in-law, her contributions minimized, her work uncompensated. It was a story designed to get her the settlement she wanted and to make any counterclaims look like retaliation from a bitter old man. I was not a party to the divorce proceeding directly. My role came in as a witness called by Philip's attorney, a woman named Denise Holloway, who was considerably sharper than Clifford Brennan and who had reviewed every document I had assembled before she agreed to take the case. The hearing had gone about 40 minutes before Denise presented the first exhibit. It was the vendor contract for a company called Meridian Advisory Group, signed by Sandra in her capacity as interim operations director, dated 4 months after the board transition. The contract was for strategic consulting services at a rate that, Denise noted, was 63% above market. Sandra's attorney objected that this was a business dispute, not relevant to divorce proceedings. The arbitrator, a retired family court judge named Helen Marsh, who had been doing private arbitration for 12 years and who had the look of a woman who had heard every story there was to hear, held up one hand. She looked at the contract for a long moment. Then she looked at Sandra. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "can you tell me who the principal officer of Meridian Advisory Group is?" Sandra's attorney started to object again. Judge Marsh did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Sandra. Sandra said the company had multiple principals. "I'm asking about one specifically," Judge Marsh said. She had been given the exhibit package. She turned one page. "The registered agent is listed here. I'd like Mrs. Hartwell to confirm whether that is her sister's name." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of something landing. Sandra's attorney leaned over to speak with her. She put her hand on his arm very briefly, the way you touch someone's arm when you want them to stop talking. Judge Marsh had seen that gesture before, I imagine, because she let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time before she said, "We're going to need to look at all of these contracts, aren't we?" It took 2 more hearings to get through everything. I won't walk through each piece because the pattern was repetitive, and repetition is not the same as emphasis. What I will tell you is that by the end of the second hearing, Sandra's original claim, that she was owed a settlement for her contributions to Hartwell, had become a secondary issue. The primary issue had become restitution. The total figure Denise put before Judge Marsh was $412,000. That included the vendor contracts, a discretionary expense account Sandra had created and used for personal travel, and a set of equipment purchases made against company accounts that had subsequently ended up at an address in Scottsdale. Sandra's attorney, to his credit, did not collapse entirely. He argued duress. He argued that his client had been a marginalized voice in a family business and had sought to compensate herself for contributions that were never formally acknowledged. It was not a bad argument given what he had to work with. Judge Marsh listened to all of it. Then she asked Philip's attorney a question that I had not expected, though perhaps I should have. She asked whether the original board transition had been reviewed by outside counsel at the time. Denise said it had not. Judge Marsh looked at me for the first time since I had taken my seat as a witness. I had been sitting quietly the way I usually sit. My hands were folded on the table. I was not trying to signal anything to anyone. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "you assembled this documentation." "Yes," I said. "Over what period of time?" "Approximately 14 months, while you were no longer formally affiliated with the company." "That's correct." She looked at me for a moment longer. "Did you ever intend to bring this forward before the divorce filing?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I intended to bring it forward when there was a proceeding that could make proper use of it," I said. "That proceeding is this one." She nodded slowly. She made a note. She did not say anything else to me. The settlement took 3 weeks to finalize. Sandra agreed to restitution of the full $412,000, structured over 4 years, with a lien against 2 properties she held in her name. She received no spousal support. She received the personal assets she had brought into the marriage, which were modest. The LLC structures were dissolved under terms negotiated separately through a business attorney. Hartwell Structural Consulting did not fully recover. I want to be honest about that. 2 of the state contracts we had lost were gone for good. Those relationships had moved on and wouldn't come back. The company that emerged from the following year was smaller, leaner, and under Philip's leadership. His real leadership, this time, without someone standing behind him arranging the furniture. He brought Ray Calhoun back into a consulting role. Ray, to his credit, came back without needing to be asked twice. He had done his own thinking about the previous 18 months, and what he told me over lunch one afternoon was simply, I should have asked more questions. I let her answer them for me. There is nothing I needed Ray to say beyond that. We ate our lunch and talked about a bridge project in the news and went on. Philip asked me, sometime after everything had settled, whether I wanted to come back to the company. He said it genuinely, not out of obligation. He was asking a real question. I told him no, not with any bitterness. I told him the truth, which was that the company was his now and it should stay his, and that the best thing I could do for Hartwell at this point was to be available when he needed to talk something through, and to otherwise stay out of the way. He said, "You were never in the way." I let that sit. "I know you believe that," I said. "We don't have to agree on all of it. We have dinner together every other Sunday now. His new life is still taking shape. He is careful about it in a way he wasn't before, and I think that care was hard-earned and will serve him. He calls me more than he used to. I answer every time. What I want to say, the thing that I kept thinking about through all of those months, through the documentation and the hearings and the quiet waiting, is that silence is not the same as absence. I was in that conference room when they read the transition plan. I was at every family dinner while Sandra refilled my coffee cup and asked me about my week. I was present for all of it, watching and listening and measuring, the way I was trained to do and the way a life in this work teaches you to do. My father used to say that a structure that looks damaged on the surface is not always compromised at its core, and a structure that looks solid on the surface is not always sound. The job, whether you're walking a bridge deck or sitting across a table from someone who has decided to underestimate you, is to know the difference. I knew the difference. I waited until I was certain. And when the moment came, I didn't need to raise my voice. The documents spoke for themselves. They always do. Paper doesn't forget. Paper doesn't soften its position because the room gets uncomfortable. Paper doesn't look away when a retired judge turns a page and asks a simple question. I have been retired for 14 months now. I wake up early out of habit and drink my coffee on the back porch and watch the light change over the yard. Carol planted a row of dogwood trees along the back fence years ago, and they come in white every spring and then fade out, and I watch them do it, and I think about her. There is still some grief in the quiet. There always will be. But the quiet is mine now, completely mine. And that is something I find, in the mornings especially, to be more than enough.